Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. My mother kept everything. That was the first thing I had to deal with when I got back to Crestwell. Not the grief, not the paperwork, not the calls to the insurance company that all went sideways in different ways. It was the sheer volume of things she'd held onto. 40 years of birthday cards, 3 broken radios she'd meant to fix, a shoebox full of recipes she'd clipped from magazines and never made. I'd grown up in that house, and somehow I'd never understood how much of herself she'd been quietly storing in it. I was a copy editor. I spent my days cutting things down, trimming the excess, making things leaner than they started. Walking into that house felt like a professional insult. I gave myself mornings to work through it and afternoons to walk, because if I spent the whole day in there, I'd lose my mind. Crestwell wasn't a bad town to walk through. Small, quiet, the kind of place where the downtown had held its shape better than most, and you could still find a hardware store and a bakery next to each other instead of 2 banks. I'd grown up here and left at 22 and come back only for visits. And now I was back for the last visit there would ever be, and I was trying not to think about that too hard while I walked. On the 3rd day, I went down a street I didn't recognize. That shouldn't have been possible. Crestwell wasn't big enough to have streets I didn't know. But I'd turned a corner near the edge of the downtown and found myself on a block that didn't match anything I had stored from childhood. Wide sidewalks, older buildings, a row of elms that had gotten very tall, and at the far end, set back slightly from the street, a building that was too large to have hidden itself from me for 30-odd years. It was a library, or it looked like one. 3 stories, stone-faced, wide stairs leading up to a set of heavy doors. No signage beyond a single word carved into the stone above the entrance. Reading. No hours posted. No city seal. Nothing to tell you who ran it or what it was part of. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I was avoiding a house full of my dead mother's things. And the door was open, so I went in. It smelled right. That's what I noticed first, and what lowered my guard more than anything else. There's a specific smell to a serious library. Paper and cloth binding, and something faintly mineral underneath. Like the building itself is participating. This place had it. Whatever it was the real thing. Or a copy so good the difference didn't matter. The interior was one large open room on the ground floor with staircases on either side, leading up to open balconies lined with more shelves. The shelves were full. Not decoratively full the way some places put books on shelves to make a room look smart, but genuinely full, floor to ceiling, with the kind of organized density that takes years to build. Reading tables ran down the center of the room. A few of them were occupied by people sitting with books open in front of them. Behind a long reference desk near the entrance, a person looked up from whatever they'd been doing and smiled at me. I say a person because that's the most accurate word I have. They were dressed in dark clothing that was formal in a way I couldn't quite date. Structured, old-fashioned, but not from any specific era I could pin down. Their face was pleasant and smooth and ageless in the way that some faces are ageless. where you'd guess anywhere from 40 to 60 and not feel confident about either. Their hair was pulled back neatly. They folded their hands on the desk. They said good afternoon. They said it like they meant it, like my afternoon specifically had been under consideration. I said hi and told them I was just looking around. They said, of course, and that I should let them know if I needed any help finding something. Their voice had a quality I kept noticing every time they spoke, a kind of settled patience, like someone who has been waiting so long that the waiting has become comfortable. I moved into the stacks. The first book I pulled out was thick, cloth-bound, brown, with a title about the settlement of a particular region of Montana. I flipped it to the publication information out of habit. I'd looked at thousands of books that way. It was just what my hands did. The publication date was 11 years from now. I put it back. I pulled out another one, a memoir. Publication date 19 years away. Another, a history of a company I'd never heard of. 34 years out. I started moving faster, pulling and checking and replacing. Every single book I touched had a date that hadn't arrived. Some were close, a year or two out. Others were further than I'd lived to see. The books weren't strange looking. They were printed and bound and designed the way regular books were, no different in their physical weight or texture. They just came from times that didn't exist yet. I was standing in the middle of the stacks trying to decide what to do with this when I became aware that the person from the front desk was beside me. I hadn't heard them move. They were just there, holding a book with both hands the way you'd offer something to someone you wanted to be careful with. They said this one had come in specifically for me. I looked at it. It was slim, maybe 200 pages, with a plain cover in a dark blue that was almost green depending on how the light hit it. There was a title I didn't take in right away because my eyes went immediately to the name on the cover. Nora Vess. My name. My full name, which wasn't a common one. I looked up at the person holding it, and they were still smiling, still patient, waiting for me to take it. I asked them what this was. They said it was mine, and that it had been waiting for some time. They said it the way you'd say something that was simply true, a fact of the room, the way you'd note that the lights were on or the heat was running. I took the book. I carried it to one of the reading tables and sat down. The first line was, I grew up in a house where everything was kept. I knew immediately that it was about me. Not a character with my name. Me. The details were too specific to be anything else. The cracked plaster in the upstairs hallway. The sound the back screen door made. The smell of the particular hand lotion my mother used. It was all there, accurate down to things I hadn't thought about in years. Details I wouldn't have been able to tell you if you'd asked, but that I recognized completely once I saw them written down. For the first 40 or so pages, it tracked my actual life. Then it didn't. The divergence was small at first, a different decision about a college course. A letter sent that in reality I drafted and thrown away. And then the bigger one, the one that reordered everything that came after. My mother going to the doctor in the year I was 26, the year she'd kept putting it off in real life, the year that turned out to matter. In the book she went. In the book they caught it early. In the book she was still alive. I sat with that for a while. The life in the pages wasn't a fantasy version of mine. It wasn't perfect. The woman in the book still made mistakes, still had difficult years, still lost things. But she had her mother through them. She finished the novel she'd been writing at 24 and abandoned when money got tight. She made choices that felt earned rather than desperate. It wasn't a dream life. It was just a slightly better one. And somehow, that was worse than if it had been impossible. It was close enough to feel real. It was close enough to feel like a door. I don't know when I stopped noticing time passing. The room was quieter than it had been. I surfaced slowly, the way you come back from being very absorbed in something, that gradual reassembly of awareness. I'd been reading for a while. I didn't know how long. The light through the high windows had changed. I looked around. The reading tables had more people at them than I remembered from when I'd come in. 7 or 8 men and women at various ages, each with a book open in front of them. They had the stillness of people who are deeply somewhere else. A woman near the window looked to be in her 60s, silver-haired, her book held loosely in her hands, as if she'd forgotten she was holding it. A man closer to me, maybe 40, had tear tracks on his face that had dried there, and he didn't seem to know. His book was open to somewhere near the middle, and he wasn't turning pages. He didn't need to. His eyes were moving, but not the way eyes move when they're reading. They were moving the way eyes move when they're seeing. I looked at the chairs closer to the back of the room. The dust was visible on the table surfaces around a few of them, around the chairs themselves. The people sitting in them had been there long enough for the room to have started forgetting them. I stood up. I set my book down on the table and I walked over to the nearest person and said, "Excuse me," and got nothing. I put my hand on their shoulder and said, "Hey," and got nothing. Not asleep, not unconscious, just gone somewhere that still had their body in the chair as a placeholder. I looked back at my book on the table. I could see the page it was open to from where I was standing, and I knew roughly where I'd stopped and how much was left. I picked it up and kept reading. I don't know how to explain what it's like to read a version of your mother who is still alive when your actual mother has been gone for 3 weeks. Language doesn't quite get there. What I can tell you is that the woman in those pages was so specifically her. The particular way she repeated herself when she was excited, the habit she had of answering a question by first telling you what the question reminded her of, that it stopped feeling like fiction inside of maybe a paragraph. It felt like a record of something real. It felt like evidence that somewhere this had actually happened. I read until I was close to the end, until I got to a passage where the woman in the book and her still living mother were sitting on the back porch of the house I was currently dismantling box by box in the October afternoon light, not talking about anything in particular, just sitting together the way you do when you have time and you haven't yet learned that time is the thing to worry about. I stopped. I sat with the book in my hands and the last few pages unread, and I thought about something I'd done hundreds of times at work. The moment before you cut something from a manuscript, the beat where you ask yourself whether what you're about to remove makes the thing better, or whether you're just making it shorter, whether what you're losing is worth what you're gaining by the loss. I set the book face down on the table. I stood up and pushed my chair back and looked around the room one more time. The other readers, the ones who'd gone somewhere else, the dust on the tables near the back, the man with the dried tear tracks who hadn't moved. I thought about what they'd been reading, the life the man had found in his book, whatever it was, a son maybe, from the grief on his face, the older woman at the window. Whatever had been close enough to real for her, that she'd chosen it over the room she was sitting in. They hadn't been tricked exactly. They'd been offered something true, and they'd chosen to hold on to it, past the point where holding on was possible. I walked towards the door. The cataloguer was not blocking it. They were simply near it, in the way something tall is simply near a wall, close enough to be relevant. They looked at me with that same settled warmth, and they said my name, and the way they said it made it sound like a question about whether I was sure. I told them I was leaving. They told me the book wasn't finished. They told me it in the same pleasant voice they'd used for everything else. The way you'd note that a meal was still cooking, purely informational, no pressure intended. They said nobody left before the last page. They said the life in those pages was still available to me, and that the library could make what was written there real, all of it, but that it required finishing. I asked them what happened to the people in the chairs. They said those guests were still reading. I said how long. They smiled and said that time moved differently for people who'd found what they were looking for. I thought about my mother, not the one in the book, mine, the one who kept everything, including broken things, including things she'd never fix, because letting go of them felt like an admission. The one who'd been scared to go to the doctor because she already knew something was wrong, and knowing for certain was worse than not knowing. The one I'd been angry at for that, quietly, in the way you're angry at someone you love for a decision that cost you both. The one I'd forgiven before the end, mostly. The one who was gone. The cataloguer said my name again. I walked forward. They were in my way, and I didn't go around them because going around them would have meant acknowledging that they were something I needed to navigate, and I wasn't willing to do that. I walked through them, through the space where they were standing. The cold that hit me was not like any cold I've experienced before or since. Not temperature cold, but something older than that. Like passing through the idea of cold, like the concept of it had a physical presence. I kept walking. The door was a door. I pushed it, and it opened, and the October air outside was sharp and real, and the elm trees were dropping their leaves onto the sidewalk, and everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. I walked back to the house. I didn't look at the library for long. That evening, I packed 4 more boxes. I labeled them carefully, the way I'd been trying to label all of them. Because my mother's handwriting had been on everything in that house, and every time I covered it with mine, it felt like an erasure I was responsible for. But it had to be done. That was what was true. I ate a sandwich standing over the kitchen sink because I hadn't bothered to unpack anything I could eat at a table with. And after that, I went through the jacket I'd been wearing and emptied the pockets the way you do at the end of a day. The page was folded once, lengthwise, torn cleanly from a binding. The paper was the same weight as the pages I'd been reading, and the text on it was in the same typeface. And when I unfolded it, I saw that it was the last page of the book, the ending I hadn't read. I stood there for a while, looking at it without reading it. I was aware that All I had to do was move my eyes down, and I would know how it ended, and that knowing might be enough. That maybe it didn't require the whole book. That maybe this one page was a way of finishing the thing I'd walked away from. My mother would have read it. That's the thing. She was a keeper. She would have held onto this page the same way she held onto the broken radios, on the chance that it might still be useful. I folded it back along the crease and held it over the sink and lit it with the kitchen lighter we kept on the counter. It caught quickly. I held it until I had to drop it, and then I watched it finish in the basin. The smoke went up, and the draft from the window above the sink took it away, and after a minute, there was nothing left but a curl of ash that broke apart when I ran the water. I went to bed. I slept without dreaming. In the morning, I got up and made coffee and opened another box, and I kept going the way you do, the way you have to.